But firstly, let's take a look at the Red Bull situation. Verstappen P2, but Alex Albon struggled. After dropping to P6 at the start, Albon pit early on, making his way back through the traffic, but a collision with Kvyat and then a power unit problem ended his afternoon. Sam, first of all, what did you make of his performance? And is it time for Red Bull to perhaps assess their options here?
Brace yourselves, Albon fans.
I'm going to try and be analytical, okay? Okay? And I'm going to put it out there again, because I always feel like I have to. I like Alex Albon. He's a nice chap. But your teammate starts right up there with the Mercedes. You're less than half a second away from pole position and less than 2 tenths away from Lewis Hamilton after qualifying. Verstappen once again displays why he is considered one of the best drivers that we've seen in Formula 1 for a long time. He is up there with Lewis Hamilton as the only other best driver on the grid at the moment, I think. Those two are the top two going. Albon, on the other hand, I currently don't think is in the top half. You started in 5th place behind Leclerc. You don't make up ground. Ricciardo gets the better of you. You're stuck in traffic for ages. And Red Bull have the clever idea to bring you in. It's a bit dodgy, but you have locked up your tyre for 9 hours going into turn 3. So you don't have any rubber left on that tyre. So they bring you in early, which I get. Gets you out of that traffic a little bit, and you're 10 seconds behind in last place now. And then you don't make up any ground. And then you start making up ground eventually after more people pit and whatnot. And then when going past Gasly, for some reason you believe that his car is half the length of everyone else's, and you just drive into him. It seems as though the moment Albon seems to have any kind of interaction with another driver, it's Kvyat, sorry, not Gasly, Kvyat. You just seem to collect them. There seems to be so much contact and poor management in your drive. You then have to come in again for another set of tyres because you locked them up massively again. It's just, where's the management? Where's the pace to match the car that you've got there? They retire you because of an engine issue, which I've got to be honest, I think that's a bit of a saving grace. I think they've said that out of kindness for Alexander Albon and maybe the abuse he may get from people such as myself. He's not good enough. I'm sorry. I've tried to stick it out. They've given so much more time to Albon than they did to Gasly. Carry on to the end of the season as well. Don't stop him out halfway through the season. Let him finish the season. But for me, there's so many great drivers waiting in the wings. There's so many brilliant people who deserve a top seat and deserve a good crack. Albon is not cutting the mustard for me. He's not even cutting the jelly. You know, he's not cutting anything. He's been given a spoon and it's made out of plastic and it snaps the moment he tries to cut anything open. The guy is just not up to scratch. And I'm kind of having enough now. We try to always give, more time. The pressure. It's a toxic environment. You're not delivering. Move on. Red Bull cannot continue to fight Mercedes with one driver, essentially. And it's just not good enough.
What did you make of the performance, Harry, or what there was of it?
It was shoddy. It was messy. I don't know what. We've seen most of Albon's problems this year have been his actual one-lap pace, where he's just admired him down the grid, and then he's had to perform well during the race to make up for his bad quality. And today, he was still a fair way off Max yesterday, out-qualified by Leclerc, so which, still not brilliant, but at least he was he was in the top 5 at least, 5th. But yeah, his race today was just it was just messy. And if you're Red Bull and you're looking at other drivers who didn't have a messy race, didn't run into other people, didn't keep locking up their right front for some reason, you've got two free agents in that Racing Point team this weekend, Hulkenberg and Perez, who both had pretty superb races. So it was a real messy one. I thought Albon had turned a corner at Mugello. But yeah, today was...
He did.
You're an idiot. He turned many corners.
I think he turned more than one corner.
Why did we do a podcast? I've lost my train of thought now. Yeah, it was just a messy one. And the retiring him he had an issue with his car. I think it was rubbish. I don't think that was actually real. But anyway, we'll see. But considering other drivers in the field don't have a drive next year and we're driving better than Albon did, it was a bit of a worrying weekend for him, I would say.
Yeah, not one of his better weekends, that's for sure. In a year that, quite frankly, hasn't had many good weekends as well. The first thing that I wanted to pick up on was his interview after qualifying, where P5, by Albon standards this year, was actually one of his better qualifyings. He was about half a second or so off the pace of Verstappen, which is about where he's been this year, give or take a few tenths, and only one car separating himself and Verstappen, which isn't great, but is still better than quite a few other qualifying performances this year. First of all, he was asked about where he could be in the race today. Firstly, he kind of joked that a win would be nice before being a bit more realistic and saying, he'd be happy with P4. And Rosberg, Nico Rosberg, on punditry duty, he picked up on this and said, I completely agree with him, that he did not like that comment at all, because it just shows a complete lack of ambition. P4 should be, based on what car he's in, the bare minimum of what Albon achieves week in, week out. And he should be claiming podiums where one of the top three, as was the case this time, they run into some sort of problems. Today it was Valtteri Bottas retiring from the race. In other situations, it's Lewis Hamilton claiming a penalty at the end of the Austrian Grand Prix. When those sorts of things happen, you want Albon to be in P4 with the opportunity to then strike, and it didn't happen. So I also took issue with him targeting P4. Where's the ambition to go for a podium? Could you imagine Max Verstappen qualifying P5 and saying, it'd be great if I finish P4 tomorrow? You would never hear that from him, because it's not what should be expected of a Red Bull driver. Ultimately, Red Bull have a target, and their target is to beat Mercedes. That's the be all and end all. Mercedes are the only team right now that are ahead of them. The target has to be to take them down, and they haven't achieved it, and no one else has achieved it in a long, long time. Do they have at their disposal two drivers that can do that? The blunt and honest answer is no. Verstappen can do it, and Albon can't. So if your driver is not in a position where he can do something about it, you need to move on. You need to look at other options, or at the very least, you need to understand why it's not happening right now and whether it could happen in the future. For personally, I think he has had sufficient time to at least show something. And today was a prime example of where Red Bull can take advantage, and they just don't. Bottas out of the race. And I'm not even speaking about Albon claiming P3 as a result of that. I'm saying Verstappen had no chance whatsoever to mix up the strategy and potentially gain a race winner, at least ask some questions of Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were both in a position where they could have pit a second time. Obviously, the safety car they did in the end, but without that safety car, there was one stop, two stop. It was a bit unsure. But either of them could have stopped, but Hamilton would have covered it off straight away. If Albon's in that fight, even 20 seconds away from the lead two guys, he's a factor. And suddenly they have to bear that in mind. Wasn't the case, and Verstappen was hamstrung. There was nothing he could do. And people compare the Bottas and Albon situations quite a lot. And I think that's completely wrong to do so, because Bottas and Albon are not in the same league, quite frankly. Bottas on Saturday, and Bottas has his own issues, and we'll probably go on to discuss those in a bit, but Bottas can beat Hamilton in qualifying, and he can take race wins when Hamilton isn't there. He beat Hamilton by 2.5 tenths on Saturday. You'd never see Albon do that over Verstappen. So I don't think those two situations are at all comparable. Looking at the race itself, I think he was fairly lucky to avoid contact on lap 1 going into turn 3. 22 laps or so, I think it was, that he ended up doing 2 pit stops, ruined the first set of mediums that he was on. Complained about Gasly racing him too hard, which is quite frankly ridiculous. There was nothing
hilarious.
There was nothing that Gasly did wrong. And second of all, you don't hear Verstappen complaining about Gasly's driving. Do you know what the reason is? Verstappen's nowhere near Gasly, as it should be, because he's got a much better car. I don't think Verstappen and Gasly have shared the same bit of circuit at all this season, because Verstappen's always, rightfully so, way ahead. Albon seems to fight Gasly on a weekly basis, and there's no reason that they should just give it up. No reason whatsoever. The Kvyat incident was poor. It was just misjudgment on Albon's part. There was no real need to move back. I know he would have had a better line if he'd got all the way back to the left-hand side of the circuit, but again, he's in a much quicker car. Kvyat was clearly struggling at the time. Albon would have got past. And yeah, I really do think that Red Bull need to assess their options here, and they need to definitely consider moving on from Alex Albon, because Alex Albon is a good driver. and he has a future in the sport, but I don't think it's at the top. I really don't think it's at the top. The one problem for me is, and this is when Albon came into that role last season, it's all about progression. That's why Gasly was dropped. From the first race of that season in Australia to his last race before the summer break, there was no progression. There was no sign that Gasly was going to get closer and closer to Verstappen. And I thought that might be different with Albon because he started out fairly well, at least in comparison to Gasly and how he fared against Verstappen. But you need to see that progression to be able to comfortably claim that seat. You need to be able to demonstrate that, okay, the qualifying head-to-head was 7/10 over the first 10 races. In the next 10 races, it needs to be 3/10 to show that, you are getting closer. But I don't think that's been the case. You remember Albon matched Verstappen in qualifying in Japan last year. I haven't seen that again this year. There's been no progression. So what sign is there whatsoever that Red Bull should stay with him? And you rightly say, where you've got two free agents, essentially, in the Racing Point cars, who showed what they were able to do this weekend. Both of them had good races. It's worrying for Albon. It really is.
On top of that, just for context, if you think we're being harsh about it, which, don't get me wrong, I think often we like to have some fun with things, but I've got the points table up in front of me, and this will surprise you here. Verstappen, 147 points in third. Ricciardo in fourth, 78 points. That tells you the gap already, and where maybe the other Red Bull should be in that gap. Perez in fifth, 68 points. Lando Norris, remember Perez has missed 2 races as well. Perez in fifth, 68 points. Lando Norris in sixth with 65 points. Alexander Albon, there he is in seventh, 64 points. Charles Leclerc and that Ferrari is 1 point behind him and has had more podiums this year than Albon has in a Red Bull that's been on the podium at least, I think, 7 or 8 times out of the last 11 races. Blimmin' Hulkenberg, he's got 10 points to his name already. He's only been in 2 Grand Prix. The poor bloke's trying his hardest, and Perez has done the same thing. So if you think that Albon, we're speaking harshly of him, that tells you everything you need to know. The fact that if he has one other bad race, there's every chance that he could drop as far down to 10th or 11th place in the Constructors' Championship and the Drivers' Championship, sorry. And that, for me, in a car that has won a race this season, legitimately, not through any, red flag business, actual on pace, that tells you everything you need to know. That is not good enough.
So, if they were to look for someone else, Sam, who should be at the top of that sheet?
You would be crazy to look past Perez or Hulkenberg. I have to take my hat off to Perez. He is driven brilliantly for the latter part of this season. He had a poor start. Not bad, but poor in comparison to what Perez I think is capable of. And then he got dropped for what we now know is the move from Sebastian Vettel. But since then, he's almost been like a driving billboard. He's like, look at me go. He's almost fourth in the championship. If he has another good race and Ricciardo has a poor one next time out in Imola, Perez goes fourth in the championship, which is just incredible. So, hat off to Perez. He deserves another seat in F1. And if it gets to be that Red Bull for maybe 2 years while they change something around, great stuff. Perez has got the backing. Perez has got the know-how. Perez knows how to develop a car. Perez will work well in a team. I don't think Perez and Verstappen will fall out over anything. On the other hand, Nico Hulkenberg. Guy's been around for a long time. He's not really old yet. He's got at least 3 or 4 years left capable in a car. Again, knows how to develop and build a team. Very popular with fans. Would probably settle into the team really well. Hulkenberg's like the most laid-back guy going, unless it's around Magnussen. Honestly, those are 2 people that you've got there that are brilliant. And if you want to look at it, I don't think he'd take it, but Pierre Gasly is one of the drivers of the absolute season so far. So why would you, again, not consider Gasly? If you could say to him, you get your time, we won't pressure you like we did, we'll give you the same environment you've got at Toro Rosso, or, oh my God, I've done it, AlphaTauri, then why not? You've got at least 3 guys in your lineup that are bloody brilliant. And if you really want to go crazy, you've got guys in F2 as well that are also churning out great performances. For me, unfortunately, this is the last season that Albon should be in that Red
Bull.
Get
Roy in the car. Come on, Red Bull.
Wow. Harry, I was going to ask for your view as to who they should be lining up, but that's clearly answered the question already. On a more serious note, anyone else you'd like to mention, or do you think it is those names that should be in Red Bull's consideration?
What, Roy Nissany? And then Roy Nissany.
I was thinking more Nico Hulkenberg and Sergio Perez, but sure.
Yeah, no, like I said earlier, I think, today was a case in point. Hulkenberg and Perez both drove really well. And why would you not take one of those drivers for that Red Bull seat next year? Maybe, I know Red Bull really want to stick to their junior program and that's what they, promote the hardest, but sometimes maybe got to admit that it's not working, and that's why they've had to drop Gasly, drop Kvyat in the past, because it's just doesn't quite work. So why not? They've employed outside before. They had Webber, they had DC when it first started, then they first started the team. So I don't. It's almost like they're kind of too focused on this young driver program to look at their other options. So yeah, if honestly I would put, I don't know who I'd choose between Hulkenberg and Perez, but probably Perez. I'd put one of those two in that car next year.
Yeah, I personally think Perez should be target one, just because we have got that previous of Perez and Hulkenberg head to head, and it was Perez who came out on top. Perez has got 8 podiums to his name. Hulkenberg, as much as I like him, there's a reason he hasn't got any. He's always been a solid driver. I don't think he is capable of that absolute top seat, and I think Perez probably is. We speak a lot about Perez's early move to McLaren and the fact that it just came too early in his career, and I would definitely agree with that. And maybe that instance actually applies to Gasly and Albon as well. Maybe the future, maybe they will get another shot. Maybe Albon will continue in there. We don't know at this point, but yeah, Perez, I think, not only based on today, but just based on his performance generally, really in the hybrid era, you can go all the way back and just see what he's capable of. He's very advantageous. He's very opportunistic, and ultimately, advantageous and opportunistic are the two things that Red Bull need the most in that second driver. We've said all along that Max Verstappen can be your number one guy. That's absolutely fine. You need that backup. And the backup needs to take advantage when Verstappen isn't there or when one of the Mercedes retires. Gasly hasn't been able to provide that role. Albon isn't able to provide that role. I think Perez would be more than fitting of doing a job there. So I'd be lining up to get Sergio Perez here. I mean, just to I don't not necessarily excuse Albon and Gasly, but we've seen Verstappen now. He's dominated the pair of them. Harry, do you think there is an instance here where Verstappen is just completely outperforming the car, or do you think that it is maybe a bit of both?
I think I don't know, because I just think that car, he's been in that team for a while now, and that car just suits him, and he has a particular way of driving it that obviously Gasly and Albon can't really get their heads around, or couldn't get their heads around. Yeah, we know how good Max is, and any driver that comes in has to drive against him. It's going to be tough. Yeah, and I guess it makes the gap look even worse. But if you're going to be in a top team such as Red Bull, you're going to, Ricciardo could do it. He could match Max, so it can be done. Yeah, it just takes a lot of talent, and I don't know. Albon and Gasly have a lot of talent, but maybe not just quite enough, at least to drive around the way that Red Bull is set up, which is quite clearly for Max, because he's their chosen driver. So I don't really know what other drivers have to do. I don't know which ones they bring in. Would Perez come in and struggle as much as Gasly and Albon? I don't know. He could well do, but they want to keep Max, so they're going to have to keep making that car for Max. So I don't know what Red Bull do, really.
Sam, do you think there's a case here that Verstappen is making Albon and before him Gasly look worse than they've actually been?
Yeah, 100%. But again, I that's part of racing, right? You need to step up to your competition, and your closest competition is the guy on the other side of the garage. Verstappen, as I said earlier, is in the top two of F1 at the moment, Hamilton being the other guy up there. He's out driving that car 100%. He's mixing it with the Mercedes. And if Verstappen wasn't around, if we had both Gasly and Albon in that car, shall we say, I think the Red Bull will be a lot further back than we think they would be. Max Verstappen is driving brilliantly. The guy is a true talent. It's raw talent. He's stepped up another level again this year. We had that Brazil performance last year when I really think it was like peak Verstappen, and he's carried that form through the whole way through this season. He's doing a brilliant job, deserves all the praise he's getting. I would love to see him in a car that is able to challenge for a race win after race win, because I think it'd be a fantastic fight between him and Hamilton. And yes, he is outclassing those two drivers, Gasly before, now Albon, but they also should be learning from that. Bottas has managed to step up. Bottas has improved over the time that he's been at Mercedes. Bottas went a whole season without a race win. And now look at him. He's beating Hamilton regularly in qualifying. They are separated by less than a couple of seconds on most races when they do both finish, which is 99.9% of the time. Bottas has gotten better because of Lewis's influence and vice versa. Lewis has also stepped it up because he's got Bottas to deal with. Bottas is no slouch. Verstappen is motivating himself and going by himself. I don't think he feels challenged by Albon. I don't think he felt challenged by Gasly. And I think that he will continue to be a complete talent. And they almost need to put someone in that isn't a young talent looking to prove themselves. The nice thing about Hulkenberg and Perez is that everyone likes them. Everyone knows them. They're a normal face around the grid. People know what they're capable of. They haven't got to go in there proving that they're worthy of some kind of drive, like Albon has. They're ready for it. They're good. So they do a couple of years. They develop the car. They go into the new era of Formula One and they help them develop how the car feels for that. And then, you know what? Perez or Hulkenberg get to a point where they're old enough to step away and they bring someone young who's had a couple more years to develop. For me, Verstappen is elite. Albon and Gasly are just very good. And I think you need to have someone in there that has no expectations, who is able of driving well, such as Perez or Hulkenberg.